You know that feeling when you can scroll on your phone for, like, hours, but you just can't get yourself to start that one really important project? Well, the answer might just come down to a single chemical in your brain: dopamine. But, and this is a big but, it's probably not for the reason you think. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on dopamine and get into the real science of what actually drives you.
So let's just tackle the biggest question right out of the gate. We've all heard it, right? Dopamine is the pleasure chemical, the feel-good hormone. But is that really the whole story? As you're about to find out, the truth is way more interesting. All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to bust that big feel-good myth. Then, we'll dig into what dopamine actually does. We'll look at what happens when things are out of balance, its super deep connection to our mental health, and we'll wrap up with some real, practical ways you can support your own dopamine system.
Okay, let's dive right into part one, the feel-good chemical myth. It's time to really unpack this popular idea that dopamine is just the molecule of pure pleasure.
And this right here, this distinction is everything. Yeah, dopamine is involved in the brain's reward system, but it doesn't just zap you with pleasure. Its real job is all about reinforcement. Think of it like the difference between liking something and wanting it. Dopamine is the chemical of wanting. It's what makes you go seek things out again and again. So at its core, what even is dopamine? It's a neurotransmitter. Just think of it like a tiny chemical messenger, a little courier running around in your brain, carrying signals from one nerve cell to the next, telling your brain and your body what's important and what to do next. It's the basic hardware for how all this magic happens.
Okay, so if it's not really about pleasure, what is it about?
Well, that brings us right to our next section, your brain's motivation meter, where we're going to explore how dopamine actually gets you to act.
Seriously, forget feel-good. A much, much better way to think about dopamine is as the go-get-it chemical. It's that invisible little spark that gets you up off the couch. It's that internal nudge that says, hey, is this worth doing? And then helps you actually see it through.
So how does this actually work? Well, it's a really simple but incredibly powerful loop. Let's say you do something beneficial. You eat a great meal, you finish a workout. In response, your brain releases a little hit of dopamine. And that dopamine sends a super clear message. Hey, that was good for us. Do it again. This simple little loop is the biological foundation for how we form all of our habits, the good ones and the bad ones.
I love this quote because it just nails the whole idea. Dopamine isn't really about how you feel in that exact moment. It's your brain basically putting a digital bookmark on an experience. It's like a little memo to your future self, making sure you remember which actions are worth repeating.
But what happens when that motivation meter is off? Because, like any finely tuned system, things can get a little out of whack. And this is where we need to look at the consequences of a dopamine imbalance. And the effects of an imbalance, they're pretty stark. It really is a balancing act. If you have too little dopamine, the scale tips toward things like feeling tired, unmotivated, and just kind of blah. But too much can tip the scale way in the other direction, leading to poor impulse control, aggression, even mania. The big takeaway here is that for dopamine, balance is absolutely everything. And getting that balance right isn't just about avoiding the bad stuff, it's about actively supporting our brains. And get this, just to show you how directly our actions affect our brain chemistry, studies have shown that a single massage therapy session can boost dopamine levels by an average of 31%. That's a powerful reminder that our daily choices have a real, measurable impact.
And this whole idea of balance leads us to a much bigger picture: the undeniable link between dopamine and our mental health. This stuff isn't just about day-to-day motivation, it's deeply, deeply connected to our overall well-being.
I mean, when the dopamine system gets seriously disrupted, it's linked to a huge range of conditions. You've got the movement issues in Parkinson's, which is caused by the death of dopamine-producing cells, all the way to the cycles of addiction that basically hijack this reward pathway. And in conditions like depression, low dopamine is a major player in that feeling of anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure from things you used to love. It just shows how massive this one chemical's influence really is.
Let's just zoom in on ADHD for a second as an example, because this is fascinating. Some amazing research shows that for people with lower dopamine signaling, the brain's internal calculator gets kind of skewed. It ends up focusing way more on the cost of a task, how boring or hard it seems, than on the potential benefit or reward. And that's what can make even simple tasks feel like climbing a mountain.
And this is where certain medications for ADHD come into play. As Dr. Michael Frank explained so well, they don't magically make someone better at a task. Instead, as the quote says, they increase cognitive motivation. They essentially help rebalance that internal cost-benefit analysis, making the reward feel bigger and the effort feel smaller.
Okay, so knowing all of this, what can we actually do about it? This brings us to our final, and maybe most important section, supporting your dopamine system. And here's the good news. You have way more influence here than you might think. No, you can't just flip a switch and release dopamine on command, but you can absolutely create the right environment for your brain to find a healthy balance. And it really all comes down to some smart, consistent habits.
First up, let's talk about the building blocks. Your brain can't make dopamine out of nothing. It needs this specific amino acid called L-tyrosine to get the job done. And you can find it in all sorts of protein-rich foods like chicken, dairy, nuts, avocados, soy products. You get the idea. Giving your brain the right raw materials is a fantastic place to start.
And it goes way beyond just your diet. Lifestyle habits are huge. Sleep is critical. That's when your brain basically cleans house and makes your dopamine receptors more sensitive. Think of them like mailboxes for dopamine's messages. Good sleep makes those mailboxes work better. Regular exercise is a proven dopamine booster. And even little things like celebrating a tiny win or doing something nice for someone can trigger that positive, reinforcing dopamine release.
Now, before we wrap this up, I have to address a trend you've almost certainly heard about, the dopamine fast. The whole idea is to cut out all stimulating activities to reset your brain. But does it actually work?
So the short answer is no. The whole concept is really based on a pretty big misunderstanding of how neuroscience works. Now, don't get me wrong, taking a break from your phone and social media is a fantastic idea for your focus and your mental health, but you're not actually resetting or emptying your dopamine stores. Your brain has a super complex, self-regulating system that just doesn't work that way.
So, let's totally reframe how we think about this. Dopamine isn't some pleasure chemical that we need to chase after. It's the engine of our ambition. It's the architect of our habits and the current of our drive. And understanding it gives you the power to work with your brain, not against it. Your motivation is a chemical story, and now you know how it's written. The only real question left is, how are you going to write the next chapter?